let's take a look at what's grabbing the headlines here in France. France Villeminot is here to take us through the front pages.
Hi,
Morning to you, Flo. We'll start off with the French president. François Hollande, of course, in the spotlight. He's in the last sort of stage of his presidency, and the papers are now starting to take stock of his track record.
That's right. And the million-dollar question is, did President Hollande keep the promises that candidate Hollande made just about 5 years ago? And in particular, one promise. Hollande, the candidate, said that young people would really be at the heart of his presidency. And so Le Parisien today, they wonder, did he actually live up to this promise? Because at the time, he swore that young people will live better in 2017 than in 2012. So that's quite a big promise.
Well, 4 years later, though, a lot of young people not buying that promise. They feel rather let down, don't they?
That's right. Mr. President, young people are still waiting. That's what Le Parisien says today. And, you know, progress has been made in certain areas, but Le Parisien says that if you actually look in detail, there's still a lot of work to be done, particularly in terms of access to housing and jobs. And if you take a look at those figures there in the top right-hand corner, Le Parisien actually fact-checks some of these figures. These are figures put forward by the government. Must be said, the government insists that things have become better over Hollande's presidency. There's a shocker. Well, Aujourd'hui en France, you know, looks at each one of these figures and says, okay, what's the deal? Do young people have better access to housing? Do they have better access to education? And in particular, what's the deal with unemployment? Because youth unemployment is very big here in France. It's 23.7% according to the government. Well, according to Le Parisien's experts, it's actually closer to 24.4%. So a little bit higher. It's still high, regardless of the figure. And another interesting thing is that unemployment in France is particularly bad compared to Europe. It used to be kind of an average with respect to Europe, but unemployment in Europe has gone down, whereas it's stagnated here in France. And so that's why a lot of people feel disappointed in Hollande, because when he was elected, a lot of young people thought, you know, he's kind of the cool socialist president who's going to change everything for us. But it turns out that things haven't actually changed that much. And check out this cartoon here. You can see Hollande talking to his prime minister, Manuel Valls. So are young people going to show me their gratitude? And Valls says, well, which young people are you talking about? The ones that have joined the far right, National Front, or the ones who have gone to the far left?
Gosh, a state of affairs there. Let's move on to the conservative daily Le Figaro. It's also focusing on young people and some alarming figures from the Ministry of the Interior on radicalization.
That's right. This is Le Figaro that says that minors are at the heart of the strategy of the Islamic State group. Now, this is because in recent weeks, several teenagers have been arrested here in France, linked allegedly to the Islamic State group. And so Le Figaro has investigated figures that have come out of the Ministry of the Interior. It says that nearly 2,000 minors have been flagged down as radicalized. And that figure has jumped 121% since last January. So Le Figaro is very much alarmed by this trend. In their editorial today, they talk about Generation Jihad. Their dream is our nightmare. And the worst about it is we're talking about French people here. It's hard to know how to respond to this situation, according to Le Figaro, but there's one thing that's clear, is that there's something in our education system that needs to change.
Well, Le Figaro have been interviewing a psychoanalyst about what draws young people to terrorism.
That's right. This is Patrick Amoyel, and he has a very interesting analysis here. He says that age is not a limiting factor when it comes to crossing the line. In fact, there's actually a breeding ground for radicalization that is specific to adolescence. He says that teenagers are by nature more extreme in their choices. And why is that? Well, he says it's because they don't actually have the same awareness of death that we adults have.
Okay, well, the issue of radicalisation, of course, has generated a lot of fear in France and led to a certain backlash against Muslims and women in particular.
That's right. And you just have to remember about the whole burkini scandal, right? That we've been talking about this whole summer. I won't tell you about the burkini scandal, but what this burkini scandal really brought to light is the fact that, you know, we talk about Muslim women, their bodies, their choices, but rarely are their voices heard. Often we hear old white men talking about them and not Muslim women. Well, Libération today has given them the floor, if you will. You can see their front page here. Nous, Françaises et musulmanes, we French women who also are Muslims. And it's a fascinating series of interviews today. We're talking about women from all sorts of different backgrounds and age groups. Now, some are practicing Muslims, some are not. some are veiled, some are not. So it's a really widespread investigation. And what's interesting is, despite their differences, there is one thing in common amongst all these women, and that's a feeling that they're ostracized within their own country. There's one woman, for instance, who says that she's afraid, she doesn't feel comfortable in Nice anymore. On the one hand, I'm afraid there's going to be a terrorist attack, and on the other hand, I'm afraid I'm going to be insulted by people in Nice. So Libération, really fascinating report, definitely recommended. And in its editorial, it pays tribute to this mosaic of women, you can see it there, that's often exploited by politicians with a certain agenda.
Well, that sounds like a fascinating read. We need to check that out. But speaking of politicians and agendas, we do, of course, have the presidential elections just a few months away, and the campaign on the right is on full swing, isn't it? And that's a campaign marked by debate on national identity.
That's right, and this whole burkini thing really plays into this national identity debate. You can see La Croix here, the Catholic paper. Very interesting read today as well. They wonder, is this a real debate or is it a fake debate? Is this an important debate to have? What does it mean to be French? Well, they actually interview a historian, and his point of view is very interesting. Patrick Boucheron, he says, we've only been obsessed with the idea of national identity here in France since the 80s, so not very long ago. He says, actually, this is once again just an issue that's exploited by politicians with an agenda.
Oh my goodness, who'd have thought?
Who'd have thought?
Well, lots of interesting reading to catch up on. Thanks for that, Florence Villeminot, taking us through the French papers this morning. More from Flo, of course, later this morning. Do stay with us here on France 24. Lots more still to come after this very short break.